Truth versus false, rumors versus real, factual versus fiction. Was it was it true that the Salt Lake City temple was designed by pure revelation to later house air conditioning units and elevators? Or was Brigham Young extremely frustrated with the construction of the temple in Salt Lake City because he didn't like the way the steeple looked? Staying away from stories, focusing on truth, real, factual, when searching for information or studying church doctrine, I feel is fundamental. I'm a storyteller, and I'm starting to realize that being a storyteller isn't factual or historical information, because there's your story, my story, and the truth. So I want to talk about debunking some of those myths that we may have heard, because I was really prompted to share this tonight. And I just got back from our spending early part of the evening at our stake conference, and then I went back for the adult session, and I am super pumped. So it's very often you see me in a tie, unless I'm in a selfie at church. So I'm excited to be here tonight at 10:30 Eastern time. And I'm really excited about talking tomorrow in stake conference. So when somebody disagrees with you, we want to give them our faith. We want to give our faith to others, but we simply can't. All we can do is give them our love. We need eyes that can see and hands that can do. And we don't want others to take away from the doctrine, from storytellers, because there's your story, my story, and the truth. And what I'm finding is I want to be as open and transparent with you as possible. And if I ever share incorrect information, I am, first of all, extremely sorry, because I want this to be a truthful forum that I can shout the gospel of Jesus Christ to the rooftops, and that people can see my light and love for the gospel and the Savior of Jesus Christ. So when my testimony is not yours, nor should it be. However, it's good to get strength from others' testimonies. Developing your own is creating your own structural foundation. Facts versus fiction. You want to stick with somebody that, following the prophet, but more importantly, following God. Because, prophets have even come out and said they're not perfect, or they made a mistake. There was an example of a prophet that said, we'll never go to the moon. And he was then elected, he was an elder at the time, and then he was then ordained or sustained as our prophet. And a few years later, we went to the moon. And he was asked publicly in the news, what did you think about that? And he goes, I simply made a mistake. I'm human. So it's about acknowledging when you do make those mistakes. And so I want to come out publicly and say that I've made some mistakes about situations. One of them is Brigham Young. I heard a rumor, and that's exactly what it was. It was a rumor. There's no factual information to back this up. I heard a rumor that he was extremely upset with the steeple at the St. George Temple. And a year later, it was struck by lightning. And everyone was saying, like, wow, Brigham Young really knew what he was talking about. Because what ended up happening, though, the brethren and the sisters, yes, it was struck by lightning, but it was struck so badly that they were blessed that the temple didn't burn down, because nails were melted, glass was shattered, and metal was bent and decrepit because of this lightning. And he was never, it actually, when you look back at church history, he actually praised the construction of the temple. He wasn't necessarily happy with something on the craftsmanship of the inside of the steeple. That's what he was criticizing. He wasn't criticizing the steeple. So is that fact or is it fiction? That's where we need to get our stories straight. Because again, have a strong prompting that we need to develop our own testimonies. We don't need to rely on others. And most importantly, we need to ask God and we need to rely on Him. Another example that I believed in and I heard, because I'm thinking, oh my gosh, the Salt Lake City temple was constructed in the 1800s. They didn't have air conditioning units back then. They didn't have elevators, but the prophets and the contractors felt inspired to leave these gaping gaps in the walls and that they could later install elevators. Is that fact? Or is it fiction? It's rumored. And this goes into people embellishing. So to go back, because in the fact when the late 1800s, when the temple was built and dedicated, they had working elevators. The first working elevator was introduced at the World's Fair in Chicago. And that's something that is factual, historical information. So when we go back to Brigham Young's story with him being upset about the steeple in St. George, that is whenever somebody says, "Oh, that Brigham Young must have really been onto something," that's an embellishment to a story, which is what reporters like to do. They like to sensationalize, or they're keen for debating and disagreeing and creating a negative and a positive to the hot news story. So things get debunked a lot. And I want to focus on factual. So when we go back to the Salt Lake City temple and its construction, I was wrong to say that wow, that was divine inspiration from the prophet, or that was, the creators were, and oftentimes things get turned into when people say like, oh, they start talking about the construction of these statues in Moroni, and then it turned into meetings with the first presidency and the prophet, and they were saying what they wanted and that they wanted to have certain facial features and certain this and that. Those are often stories, and there's nothing wrong with stories, but it doesn't depict actual information. So when people pick and choose what they feel about our church, they need to ask God. And we can act as a vessel. Like I said earlier, we want to share, we want to give our testimony to that person because we're so passionate about the gospel. But we can't. We can just love them. And we can point them in the right direction to find, is it fact or is it fiction? So I would love to get to your questions about this, and I can't wait for this to be posted as IGTV and read the comments underneath.